Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. I am Frankie Miranda, President of Hispanic Federation, and I am delighted to welcome you to a live stream conversation hosted by Latinos for Better Future. We are excited to be joined by Michael Regan, Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, and look forward to an in-depth discussion on climate action and environmental provisions of President Biden's Build Back Better Act. Provisions already being passed by the U.S. House of Representatives and now being debated in the U.S. Senate. Also joining us are Brooke Sanchez, White House Policy Advisor for the Office of Domestic Climate Policy. Also, Mark Magaña, Founding President and CEO of Green Latinos, and Lupe Equivel, Vice President of Federal Policy at the Hispanic Federation. And of course, all of our coalition members and everybody listening today. Thank you so much for being here. You can join the discussion by adding your questions to the speakers by using the Facebook or YouTube chat function. The Build Back Better Act represents the largest investment in climate action in U.S. history and our nation's biggest investment in social programs since the New Deal. Let's pause for a second and think about this. This legislation includes over 130 different climate and environmental investments on a scale never before seen in Congress. It contains substantial consumer rebates and tax credits to reduce costs for middle-class families shifting to clean energy and electrification. It creates hundreds of thousands of good jobs in clean energy, from wind turbine blades to solar panels to electric cars, and advances environmental justice by investing in projects around the country while delivering 40% of the benefits of investments to disadvantaged communities. The Latinos for a Better Coalition was formed to strengthen the voice of Latino organizations and Latino communities on this important legislation. Our goal is to ensure passage of Build Back Better Act with the inclusion of key Latino priorities and to ensure the full participation of the Latino community in the initiatives created by the legislations once President Biden signs it into law. Now, this is more important than ever to ensure that Latino voices are heard on climate action. Latinx communities are on the front lines of climate change. We live in areas with high exposure to climate hazards. We are overrepresented in industries that make us susceptible to this impact, such as the agricultural and construction sectors. Believe me, I know the devastating impact of climate change on communities firsthand, having growing up in Puerto Rico with much of my family still living on the island and witnessing firsthand the devastating impact of Hurricane Maria. This is personal. This is personal for all of us. And that is why I am looking forward to this conversation. But now, I'm very excited to introduce a friend and a great leader, Mark Magaña, the founding president and CEO of Green Latinos, a national network of Latino environmental and conservation advocates, and a founding member of Latino for Better Future. Mark is a veteran of both Congress and the White House, a good friend of the Hispanic Federation, and a fierce advocate for Latino environmental interests. And Mark will be joined later on by Lupe Equivel, who is our point person for environmental policy at Hispanic Federation. But first, mi amigo Mark Magaña. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, my friend Frankie. Thank you for laying out the important issues before us. I also want to make sure I recognize the whole team at Hispanic Federation and to the Latinos for a Better Future Coalition for coming together on the successful push for passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework and soon the Build Back Better Act. The Build Back Better Act has the opportunity to have a real positive impact on our long-suffering frontline environmental justice communities and is the catalyst needed to put the U.S. on the path to meeting its climate goals, creating millions of good-paying jobs and opportunities for all and growing our economy. In addition, the investments delivered through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework and the BBBA are one of the single largest investments in U.S. water infrastructure ever. The Build Back Better Act, when fully implemented, with continued strong frontline community engagement as outlined in the Environmental Justice for All Act, has the power to advance environmental justice through investments to disadvantaged communities as part of the President's Justice 40 initiative. We are looking forward to hearing from the administrator on his plans to proactively engage with frontline communities to ensure these resources are best and most impactfully rolled out on the ground. But first, let me introduce the administrator. Administrator Michael S. Regan is the 16th administrator of the U.S. EPA and the second person of color to lead the U.S. EPA ever. He's a native of Goldsboro, North Carolina, where he developed with his grandfather a passion for the environment while hunting and fishing and exploring the beautiful lands and waters of the intercoastal plains in North Carolina. He began his career as a national program manager with the U.S. EPA, and prior to his nomination as EPA administrator, he served as secretary of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, where he spearheaded the development and implementation of North Carolina's seminal plan to address climate change and transition the state to a clean energy economy. Very importantly, he also secured the largest coal ash cleanup in the United States history and completed complex negotiations regarding the cleanup of Cape Fear River, which was contaminated by PFAS. In addition, he established North Carolina's first of its kind Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board to better align social inequities, environmental protection, and community empowerment. Administrator Regan is a proud graduate of the North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University, making him the first EPA administrator to have graduated from a historically Black colleges and university. Throughout his career, he has been guided by a belief in forming consensus, fostering an open dialogue rooted in respect for science and law, and an understanding that environmental protection and economic prosperity go hand in hand. On a personal note, Administrator Regan and I have children the same age, and we've had the opportunity to have conversations about how we're driven in our work by our children, by hopes we have for their future, and for making sure that they don't live in a life that's been deteriorated by climate change. So we welcome, very excited to have with us, EPA Administrator Michael Regan.
Well, thank you, Mark, for that kind introduction, and thank you for your friendship, and more importantly, thank you for your leadership. And Frankie, thank you for that welcome earlier. You know, it's great to be here with all of you, and I really appreciate the invitation. A couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege to travel throughout the southeast region of this country on what we called a Journey to Justice tour. It was an opportunity for me to see up close the environmental injustices that communities of color live with every single day. We went from Jackson, Mississippi, to New Orleans, Louisiana, to Houston, Texas. We met with people on their front porches, in their churches, and in their schools. And we spent time listening to the plight these communities have had to endure for generations. During the Houston leg of the trip, I spent time with the organization Tejas and predominantly Latino communities that reside up and down the Houston Ship Channel. And combined with living in the shadows of industrial facilities, these communities are often inhaling air toxins and experience the constant worry of environmental health hazards. These communities exhibit just how far we need to go to ensure that communities with environmental justice concerns receive the level of protection and access to a clean environment that they deserve. But we also know that Houston isn't alone. Latino communities across this country face similar health threats, and a warming world only exacerbates the risk. EPA recently released a social vulnerability report that confirms the disproportionate burden Latino communities face. Our analysis indicates that with a 2 degrees Celsius increase of global warming, Hispanic and Latino individuals are 43% more likely to currently live in areas with the highest projected reductions in labor hours due to extreme temperatures. With regards to transportation, Hispanic and Latino individuals are about 50% more likely to currently live in areas with the highest estimated increase in traffic delays due to increased coastal flooding. These are serious concerns that truthfully keep me up at night. But that's why I'm pushing my team at EPA to go further and faster than we've ever gone before, so that Black and Latino and Indigenous communities can live healthier lives and realize the full protections of our environmental laws and policies. That's what makes President Biden's Build Back Better plan and the bipartisan infrastructure law so important and so urgent. The bipartisan infrastructure law is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to change the lives of the people I've been honored to meet throughout the Journey to Justice tour. It will allow EPA to build on the $100 million in funding we received through the American Rescue Plan to support the priority needs of our overburdened communities. The law includes more than $50 billion in clean water projects. With these funds, EPA will replace the lead service lines still in the ground all across the country, address the threat of PFAS pollution facing communities, and protect critical water bodies that are important to communities and to economies. It also invests $47 billion to help communities, especially our most vulnerable communities, prepare for the extreme weather events, more than $5 billion to clean up longstanding pollution at Superfund and brownfield sites, $5 billion to decarbonize the nation's school bus fleet, which will improve air quality for more than 25 million children like Mark's child and my child, $100 million for a pollution prevention program, which will help businesses reduce toxic pollutants in communities that they serve. Importantly, the law will also deliver high-speed internet access across America. Latino Americans are 15% less likely to have high-speed internet than their white peers. We're going to eliminate the stark digital divide in this country. But even with this historic level of funding, President Biden recognizes that we still have much more work to do to tackle systemic inequities and to create a rising tide for all communities, especially our communities. The Build Back Better plan will accelerate our progress toward creating a sustainable, more resilient, and more equitable future. It's about giving families in this country some breathing room. There are many critical provisions in this plan that will benefit Latinos, from lowering childcare costs to tackling housing inequities. It will also reduce the climate pollution that disproportionately harms Latino communities, lower consumer energy costs, and create good-paying, clean energy jobs in communities all across the country. The Build Back Better plan will address the historic wrongs that have held back generation of Latinos and help ensure America truly lives up to her highest ideals. Your partnership is essential to realizing that future. So I want to thank you again for having me. I want to thank you all again for your leadership and for standing up for your communities. I hope you all have a great meeting, and I look forward to working closely together as we tackle these inequities that our country faces. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Administrator Regan, and thank you for all the work that you are doing and have done throughout your career. We look forward to the implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure framework and of the Build Back Better Act and working with you on those. I want to introduce our next guest and speaker, Brooke Sanchez. He's the policy advisor for the Office of Domestic Climate Policy at the White House. He formerly served as a White House climate advisor under President Barack Obama as well, and was most recently a senior scientist and engineering analyst at High Watermark, a New Mexico-based environmental consulting service. Brooke, we look forward to hearing from you and then having some question and answer period for us and our attendees. Thank you, Brooke.
Hey, thank you, Mark, and thank you for inviting me to speak today, and thank you to the Hispanic Federation and Latinos for a Better Future for organizing this event. My name is Brooke Sanchez, and I, as Mark mentioned, I serve as a policy advisor in the White House Office of Domestic Climate Policy, which is led by the National Climate Advisor, Gina McCarthy. I've been with this team since day one, but I did recently just relocate from my home in New Mexico. And you know, I really am glad that I have. This is really an incredible team here. One that's been tasked by the president with coordinating a whole of government response to combat the climate crisis and seize the opportunities that it presents. And we've spent every one of the last 11 months working to deliver on that promise, on the president's promise for climate and jobs. So I actually did have an opportunity to serve as a very junior staffer on the Obama White House, also working on the climate crisis. And having worked through that, I just want to reflect on a sec on why that whole of government commitment is so important and what's really different now. Even just a few years ago, folks were talking about the climate crisis as an environmental issue, and it's not. It's a people issue, and the president gets that at its heart. When President Biden thinks of climate, he thinks of people and he thinks of jobs. He thinks about squeezing out poverty and building up the middle class in our communities. And he thinks about how we as a country can win the future for ourselves and our children. And that's why on his very first day in office, almost 11 months ago now to the day, he started to fulfill that commitment. His day one executive order re-entered the Paris Climate Agreement, named my boss, Gina McCarthy, as the first ever national climate advisor, and established the office that would coordinate that whole government response. He followed that up with a commitment and a more robust executive order laying out the steps that we would take to address the climate crisis and advance environmental justice, especially in the communities that have been harmed the most by the climate crisis. And since those days, we have really not looked back. Just a few months after that, President announced his nationally determined contribution, our commitment to the rest of the world, and the run-up to the Global Leaders Summit in Glasgow, and the President's Climate Summit that he convened in April. And that commitment to reduce our country's emissions by 50 to 52% from 2005 levels by 2030 is really within our reach. We took a huge step forward on that just before Thanksgiving, when the President signed the bipartisan infrastructure law, as the administrator so thoughtfully laid out there. Really what this is doing is laying the groundwork for us to move toward an economy powered by clean energy. And this is really much more than roads and bridges. This is really infrastructure that benefits a 21st century economy and the 21st century problems that we face. These critical investments include, $65 billion to upgrade our energy grid, invest in the innovation that's going to lead the way forward for new businesses, reduce energy costs. But as big as $65 billion is, it's even bigger because it's going to catalyze an additional $15 billion in private investment in innovation. The law also acknowledges that the climate crisis is already here, and we are paying a tremendous cost by investing $50 billion in strengthening our resilience. Necessary investments because the impacts of climate change are already here. We're already seeing those every day. It also addresses long-standing environmental harms, such as the administrator mentioned, by making $55 billion investment in clean water, $20 billion in remediation for brownfields and Superfund sites. And look, I spend morning, noon, and night thinking about emissions reductions, but there's no questions. Even though these investments will significantly reduce emissions, we have to go further. More is needed. And we are really on the cusp of taking additional action here that are going to get us there. That's the President's Build Back Better agenda. The President's Build Back Better Act, recently passed by the House, will position us to meet our climate goals while growing domestic industries and creating good paying union jobs. So real quick, I know we want to have a good discussion here, but let's get down to some of these details. So the Build Back Better Act will deliver clean energy tax credits and rebates and move us forward 100% carbon pollution-free power and save American families hundreds of dollars per year on energy costs. We're talking about the kind of long-term action that we need, not year-to-year changes in tax policy, but real support that is going to get the industry where it needs and get clean power to families, not just that are rich enough to afford it on their own, to every family. We also know that our transportation future is electric and made in America by union workers. So for middle-class families, the Build Back Better Act will lower the cost of electric vehicles by $12,500 each. As a former farm kid and a Forest Service worker, I'm really excited to talk about the Civilian Climate Corps, that's going to enlist a new, diverse generation of 300,000 members to conserve our public lands, bolster the climate resilience of our lands, while putting really good-paying union jobs back within reach, especially for young people in areas that have not had these kind of opportunities before. I think something really key to think about as well is the Build Back Better Act is really about advancing environmental justice through a new clean energy and sustainability accelerator that's going to invest in projects around the country while making sure that we deliver 40% of those investments to disadvantaged communities. This is also going to be making our largest ever investment in clean energy manufacturing. If we're going to be deploying clean energy across the country, it's got to be built in America. It's technology about wind turbines, solar panels, electric cars need to be made here at home. That's going to create thousands of good paying jobs. Really key here, as we've talked about with resilience, we're really going to be working here to harness natural climate solutions, coastal restoration, forest management, soil conservation. These are the kind of issues that really Latino communities are on the front line, whether you're working in these areas, in these industries, or adjacent to the public lands in the West, where we're seeing that forest fires are something that can affect you across thousands of miles, not just if you're next door. So really, together with the bipartisan infrastructure law, these are investments that are going to really put us in position to achieve the president's goal of 50% to 52% emissions reductions by 2030. This is going to really seize on these opportunities to grow jobs and industries, save families money, and protect public health. Really, this is the message I think that I have sort of to discuss here today is that we are very close. These investments, I think the president has been very clear from day one. We have not stepped back from these commitments. We are put a substantial down payment on this with the bipartisan infrastructure law. And right now, we are on the last yard line of the Build Back Better Act. And I think we are really very close to sort of sealing the deal here and making the kind of investments that are really going to transform our communities for decades to come. So very happy to just dive in a little bit deeper here, but thank you for the opportunity to discuss some of our work to date and hopefully the work that we're going to be doubling down on in the next couple of weeks here. Thank you.
Okay, I want to introduce to the screen Lupe Equivel, Vice President, Federal Policy and Advocacy at Hispanic Federation, who will be joining me as we field questions from our audience. The first question, Roque, and thank you for your important statement and the work that you're doing at the White House. The bipartisan infrastructure framework and the Build Back Better Act, they speed up the phase out of our dependence on dirty fossil fuel sources of energy. What we want to know, and our audience wants to know, is how will the administration ensure a just transition with education and training for high quality family sustaining jobs that are being created expeditiously in non-fossil fuel industries for those workers that are living through the transition, and that those jobs will go to Latinos?
Absolutely. So, one of the first items that we stood up was the president's interagency working group on energy communities. So, this is really key. We're talking about communities like Appalachia, the Ohio River Basin that everyone thinks about, but this is also basically all of New Mexico, where I'm from, the Permian Basin, the Four Corners area, that these are communities that have really have driven their economies by fossil fuel. And it's been a great mobilizer for sort of an economic engine for folks rising up. And through that working group, we've been already identifying resources from the Small Business Administration, the Department of Energy, to make investments in those communities and help those communities chart their own paths forward in ways that they can really seize on the infrastructure that's already in their communities. Can we take former coal-fired power plant sites and transfer those towards new, cleaner sources? I know DOE has been doing a lot of work there. So we've laid the bedrock for that and identifying where these communities are, what the resources are needed to get there. And I think really what we need to seal the deal is Build Back Better Act to get to get these resources within reach of communities to make sure that they are building the economic futures that they want, that we are not coming in and dictating what the next industry is, what the training is, but making sure that they have all the tools necessary to really seize on the opportunities of a clean energy future.
Laura?
Oh, yes. Hi, welcome. Good afternoon, Roque. Thank you so much for being here with us and for that wonderful presentation. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the President's Justice 40 initiative. I mean, to have that be one of his first executive orders when he took office was incredibly, generated a tremendous amount of optimism about this clean energy revolution and the potential for the impact on Latino and other frontline communities. I know it was an idea that now across the government, agencies are working hard to figure out how to actually deliver on. And so I'd like to know, these many months later, how is that initiative, how is that work going to really ensure that at least 40% of the investments made by the Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator get delivered to our communities, to frontline and disadvantaged communities? And how can we make sure that Latino communities are not left behind?
Yeah, absolutely. So as many of you know, very early in the term, the president founded the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, and maybe we even have some members of the advisory committee with us today. I think that has been really key because for a lot of agencies, we think of the traditional sort of EPA, other agencies that are more on the front lines of this have been thinking about this in some ways. But you start talking about, the Department of Defense. If we start talking about Fish and Wildlife Service, we talk about sort of all across the government. This is really something that has been very foreign to a lot of folks. I think very much the first step is defining what this actually means in terms of disadvantaged communities, getting this out there and getting this really baked into the working procedures of just regular federal employees across the government. Mm-hmm. That's a huge task, and we really want to thank the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee for helping us on that, really holding our feet to the fire to making sure that we're following through on this, that we're actually targeting the things we need to. And I think that's been really helpful because we've just passed the bipartisan infrastructure law. We are hopefully going to be passing and signing the Build Back Better Act very soon. And that is a huge amount of money. That's going to be a lot of roads, a lot of bridges. And we need to get this right from the get-go. If we go through another sort of generational investment in infrastructure that divides communities, that excludes people rather than bringing them in, we've lost sort of right out the gate. So I think these last months are really been helpful for us to sort of kick the tires on this process. I know in the next couple months, because I know money is going out the door already at a number of agencies, some really powerful new tools that agencies can use to make sure that they are taking these things into account, that they are doing this in the spirit of environmental justice and not just checking boxes. But I think these steps are, I don't want to get ahead of folks here, but I think we're going to be seeing some good announcements soon on that, especially because we've got a lot of things to build in the next couple of months.
We definitely look forward to those announcements, and thank you. Also, thank you for mentioning WEJAC. Yep. Very proud of the work that Cecilia Martinez at CEQ and one of our founders at Green Latinos, Andrea Delgado at the United Farm Workers, is doing, including many of our members that are on the WEJAC. They're doing commendable work at and extending a significant amount of sweat equity in that work. So
absolutely,
giving that opportunity. As I mentioned earlier, the investments delivered through the bipartisan infrastructure framework and soon the Build Back Better Act are one of the largest single investments in U.S. water infrastructure ever.
Yep.
These investments include safe drinking water, lead pipe replacement, remediating PFAS in drinking water, and protecting regional waters of the United States. My question is, how will EPA ensure that disadvantaged Latino communities who have historically had a harder time getting access to clean water and applying for federal dollars to get the investments, how can they make sure that they get the investments they desperately need to upgrade their water systems in their communities?
Yeah, and I think that's you really sort of got hit on a key point there, is that there is a lot, like currently there is a lot of money out there to do this kind of work, to upgrade water lines. But if you're not a big city, if you're not someone with slick consultants that can help you fill out the forms, that's it. You're locked out of that money. So that is sort of the key two-step piece here. We have the money, and we're getting the authority to do the work that needs to be done, to put that down payment on removing all lead service lines in the United States, determining the extent of the PFAS problem and starting to address that. But just having the money is nearly not enough. So really what EPA and other folks have been focusing on is, how do we lower the barriers for these communities to make sure that this is actually accessible to the place that we need it? The places that are, maybe the loudest folks in applying aren't the ones that need this money necessarily. It's going to be small communities. It's going to be places that the problem has been persisting for decades and decades. So I think that's really the key here, is not just the money. It's looking at the process in the agency, not just EPA. This is going to be very key for, I think I only briefly mentioned on it, but the remediation programs for well capping, for abandoned wells, oil and gas, is a huge issue for water, especially in our Western communities. And that is getting those communities to the front of the line of saying, like, this is our problem, and making sure those barriers are lowered to the point where they're actually accessible to the communities that need them, and holding ourselves accountable for that.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. A couple of things. Sorry, I lost my place here. The Build Back Better legislation will target incentives to grow domestic supply chains in solar, wind, and other critical industries in communities on the front lines of the energy transition like ours. Yet historically, these industries have not done as well at employing Latino workers, despite high Latino employment in construction jobs. Does the administration have a plan to ensure that the incentives are combined with employment diversity requirements to ensure that all Americans will have an opportunity in this growing sector?
Yeah, so that is absolutely something front of mind for us, because I think the same for money to do the infrastructure work, is that I think folks have seen that maybe solar panel installers and that sort of industry has been generally not nearly as diverse as it has been, and I think it's folks have also seen that it's not necessarily been as friendly to organized labor as it has been. So I think these are sort of the two fronts I think that we're really working on, is that this money needs to be spent in a way that really is encouraging the most diverse workplace we can, and ensure that every single person working in those under those dollars has the opportunity to join a labor union, one that can protect their rights, one that can make sure that they're getting those competitive wages that our communities have been looking at sort of like across the fence line for a very long time. So that is absolutely really front of mind as agencies are rolling out this money, is that that this is making sure that you have access to those jobs, and we have access to fair wages. That's environmental justice, and that's going to be baked in from day one.
That's terrific. That's great to hear, because we know incentives work. Good intentions don't, but incentives do.
And thank you for keeping the ball in the eye on the environmental justice communities. The BIF and the BBA, they create incentives and programs to support clean vehicle regulation and ensure that communities, Latino communities, especially nationwide, located next to highways, ports, and other major freightways, can breathe cleaner air and live healthier lives, especially their children with their small lungs. We want to know is how will funding from the BIF and the BBBA be deployed in a meaningful way to reduce and eventually eliminate the impact of heavy-duty vehicle pollution on Latino and other disproportionately impacted communities?
Absolutely. And I think, thinking about our ports, I think unless you have lived near a port, I used to live in Houston, and I knew that port. It's huge. It's incredible. You look at Long Beach. I think for most people in America, if you're not right next to it, they've only seen the Long Beach port in the last couple of months as the supply chain issues have sort of come into fact, and see these enormous ships right off, basically burning bunker fuel and idling trucks that are just going 24/7 right outside these communities. It's huge. So that is really a prime, I think, for a lot of folks, this is really a low-hanging fruit in terms of the opportunity to electrify ports, to make investments in clean ports. And I think, not just shifting to different fuels, slightly cleaner, going electric here. So we've been identifying, already doing some work with DOT on this for their existing funding. I know we've been doing some work here on the East Coast as we've been building up ports for the offshore wind industry. So as we're making those investments, if we're investing for the wind energy industry, we're not going to be building up ports that are going to be idling diesel 24/7. We need to be building clean from the start and mobilizing all of our investments to electrify the tenders and all the shoreside equipment on ports. And this is, I think, really DOT is really excited about this work and making these investments because some of the worst in air quality in their country is just right outside these port facilities, and we're looking at facilities that can really, with some small investment and some leverage, we can make a huge difference, especially in childhood mortality, asthma, and this is really a key place. And I know that the Secretary of Transportation is very excited to move forward with this work.
Yeah, I've talked to him and his staff about that, so thank you for the message.
I think we have some questions from viewers, and I just want to say this is a very civilized discussion and may not quite convey the excitement that I know that we at Hispanic Federation have about the potential for this bill and the impact on our communities. I mean, it is really, to have something. It is not perfect. It is not perfect, and we're continuing our work to try and make it better. But to have something that could really significantly address things that have been abandoned and ignored for so long, that have such dire consequences for our communities, is really thrilling. And it is sometimes hard to convey that on a Zoom call. So I do want to say that. So I think we have some questions. I can read that from Susan Windmiller, who says, "This is great. Thanks for presenting. It'd be great to start breaking down these national projects with local projects by locations. People need to know, how will this help me, my family, and my community?" And ain't that the truth in almost everything, right?
Yeah.
It's important for people to understand how it impacts their daily lives, and that's no different in this case.
Absolutely. And this is really pretty much all we're thinking morning, noon, and night right here. So folks may know that Mitch Landrieu from Louisiana was recently brought on board at the White House to head up the sort of nucleus of all Build Back Better implementation sort of efforts, and we are charging forward. I've actually been co-opted by their team to be sort of marshaling everything that we can to get this money out the door. So we definitely have some early work that needs to get done in terms of, these are grant programs that are competitive, getting out the door, and sort of program dollars that are going out to individual states to divide up. But we have some really, really tight timelines by Congress that we got to get a lot of this money flowing within 90 days for a lot of these programs. So stay tuned. I would say keep an eye out. Agencies are getting new guidance out day by day. And I'm just as excited as y'all are to see where the next projects are and seeing these pop on up.
Thanks, Roque. Earlier, you mentioned oil and gas wells.
Yep.
And, for more than 100 years, the oil and gas industry has been drilling wells across the nation and more often than not, walking away when they're done. What's left is a rusting, leaking, hidden legacy of wellheads, pipes, pumps, and other infrastructure that's slowly failing, putting our communities and our climate at heavy risk. And while new methane rules that are coming out to reduce leaks in oil and gas wells, which we're commenting on this week, it's a critical step in the right direction. It will take what we want to know what it'll take to ensure that we stop investing in harmful fossil fuel infrastructure altogether, and instead invest fully in clean energy sources. And then how will we also ensure that oil and gas companies operating on federal lands have the money on hand to clean up spent oil and gas wells when they're done, instead of passing the buck to taxpayers?
Absolutely. So hopefully, I think a lot of you folks may have been following the Department of Interior report last week, preliminary report on the federal oil and gas program. If you didn't read it, you could sum it up basically in one sentence: is that the program's broken in so many ways, in terms of, royalty rates have not been adjusted for basically almost a century in a lot of ways. We're taxpayers not getting a fair return on those resources. I think we're all on the same page of whether emitting greenhouse gases are giving you a taxpayer return as well, but also pointing out that the bonding requirements are absolutely low. The bonding on a federal well is basically less than I pay in house insurance in a year for something that will arguably cause much longer, huge burdens on communities forever, and the company can just walk away from that. So, in the Build Back Better Act and infrastructure law, we are making these very, I think, noble investments in capping wells, reclaiming coal mining lands that are great, that we're sort of cleaning up all the messes that have already been left. But it's absolutely clear from the Department of Interior's preliminary work that the system is broken on so many levels. Reforms are needed sort of at the base to make sure that folks are using public resources have to be held responsible. And this is really, I think, definitely don't view that report as, our homework's done, pencils down. That's the first step. This is absolutely the first step of uncovering the dark corners and determining where we go next.
Do we have another question from the audience? From Linda Perez Davila: how can our nonprofit Latino organization help you create more awareness and more support in our communities? We need to do more and involve others in joining us in this venture.
Absolutely. So, out there, and I think since day one, we started this off on a very good note of the Build Back Better Act. We have really not wavered since day one in terms of what we need, and we've been very clear on what Congress needs to do. So I think that's sort of one step for folks, is making sure that you let people know that your values align with that. That we've got lots of work to be done. I think it is going to be a huge effort as we get money out the door from the infrastructure law and Build Back Better. That we need to make sure that our local communities are aware of the resources that are available. We are. I know these groups are going to be doing a very good job of getting that word out, but we need as much help as we can to make sure that we're going to be doing our best on the federal side to get these at least 40% benefits to communities. But we need communities to seek us out as well.
I think that's a really great point. You said be watching for announcements, and many of us are, but many in our communities don't know even what that is, or they don't know how to access the benefits.
Yep.
Right? And without some real intentional outreach and capacity building and technical assistance, our communities, it's one of the ways our communities get left behind. right? Because we don't have that expertise. So, whatever you can do on your end, there's obviously desire there, right? What there may not be is experience in how to access this. So I think working together, it's really going to require us working together to get these benefits to our communities.
Absolutely. And I think love to have a conversation that continues on how do we make this easier. I think a lot of us remember sort of the Recovery Act and sort of the challenges that we had there. I think we need to learn from that and figure out, what is the easiest possible portal to make sure we get these resources in front of folks that need them.
Terrific.
Thank you, Roque. As you know, the infrastructure bill is going to supercharge our much needed infrastructure upgrades, but at the same time, it's also going to quickly increase the demand for raw materials like asphalt and concrete, which are sourced and manufactured in frontline communities, both rural and urban. What can be done? What can you do to mitigate the impacts of this manufacturing and shipping pollution from diesel transportation and point source air and water emissions that will be associated with this quick demand growth?
Absolutely. So I think, I guess first two things to point out. Two sort of efforts my colleagues at the Council on Environmental Quality have been working on, which are NEPA and the Waters of the United States, two of our sort of bedrock environmental laws, making sure that we are getting those back to a defensible place, a place that fulfills what they're meant to do in terms of protecting our environment and our public health. So those efforts are underway. I know those are sort of longer lead, but we're getting back on the right track there to making sure that the law is actually being followed for these projects. But in terms of materials, that's one thing that we've been very clear with within our team, that Gina McCarthy has been clear on, is that when we talk about climate resilience, on the one hand, we're talking about, if we build this new bridge here, is it going to be there in 100 years due to coastal erosion, due to flooding? Is it going to last? But we're also taking a look at those materials. Are we investing in cleaner American steel, into lower emissions concrete? Are we looking at the inputs in there? Are we making the problem worse by with our paving, with concrete, with the steel? We need to make sure that the inputs into that more resilient infrastructure aren't making the problem worse. So I know folks are looking at that, and that's a message very well received, because if we're going to be making this huge investment, we need to be making it in the right direction here. We don't need to be making the problem worse with every piece of physical infrastructure that we repair or build.
Great, thanks. So let's talk taxes. The investment tax credit is one of the major vehicles, right, that has spurred innovation and increased people's ability to adopt new technologies. I did say there are some things in the bill that we would still like to see improved, and one of those are the allocated credits for low-income solar. Those are some of the primary provisions that directly enable low-income and underserved communities to access local solar energy. But these are the only clean energy tax credits subject to both an application-based structure and annual capacity limits. And structuring the credits in such a way is going to undermine the goal of increasing community energy access by creating unnecessary obstacles to securing the credit. And this is going to have an impact on deployment. It's likely that some will abandon the bonus, and environmental justice in low-income communities will suffer the consequences. So we'd really like the White House to take a look at, if there's a way to remove the application requirement for low-income clean energy tax credits and just make them accessible through the traditional investment tax credit structure. Is that something that you're looking at? Or
no, I think this is something we've heard from other folks. I know that sort of message received there, because, it's a pretty cruel way to structure a program, in my personal opinion, in terms of for folks with more access, you make it easier to apply for that credit, and you sort of doubly punish for trying to do the right thing, and you halfway through you throw your hands up. So I mean, that is going to be, that is absolutely just a really powerful tool, especially for the households in those income brackets to be able to make this work. So yeah, so I think we've got sort of two tasks here. One is that really the priority is getting into very consistent support, but we also need to make sure that it's actually accessible to folks. That's really key, and definitely take that message to heart. I'd love to keep chatting about that if we could get an opportunity.
Terrific. Let's take some more questions from our audience.
Let me get one more, Lou. Okay, we talked about the funds that are quickly moving to state, regional, and local governments.
Yep.
And the real intention of Justice 40 will only be fulfilled if these funds are allocated equitably to small, minority, and women-owned contractors. What can the federal government do to ensure that these funds are not moved into our communities by rather the large contractors that exist and dominate the government procurement systems now? And what kind of accountability will exist as these funds are distributed over many years?
Yeah, absolutely. So so that is a key distinction, I think, for folks sort of to break it down. That the bipartisan infrastructure law has some money that's going to be going out, directly from Department of Transportation to this community here, this community over there. But for some of the programs, a large amount of that money is going to be the program funds, which are divided out from the federal government to the states, and then the states administer those programs. But as with any of those sort of program level funds, there are always sort of the rules of the road that the Department of Transportation, Department of Energy gets to set in terms of making sure that the states are playing by the same rule book, that are reaching out to diverse suppliers, diverse employers. And I think that's going to be the same here. I know there's a lot of folks working on this now, because that for some of the Department of Energy programs, especially or actually the DOT and DOE programs for electric vehicle chargers, for instance, a huge amount of that money is going to be going out through program funds to local communities. And the work's being done right now to make sure that one, we want to make sure that this money is going out for chargers that are actually going to be used, that get into the communities that need them, that probably can't afford them on their own if market forces were left up to it. But then also making sure that the rules for those programs are actually benefiting the local communities and the local workers. So that work is definitely underway to make sure that the funds that are going out to the states are actually fulfilling what this bill and what this law is meant to do.
Yeah, we need to make sure, as you mentioned, we need to make sure that we eradicate these charging deserts by expanding and equitizing access to EV infrastructure, and then also make sure that the purchasing credits that are inaccessible for a lot of our community aren't just for new vehicles.
Yes.
We need to make sure that that EVs are accessible to all our communities.
Yeah, we'd advocated for direct pay in the tax credits, and that was left out of the bill. But we'll maybe next go around.
We'll see. Yep.
So now I think we'll take some questions from the audience. Oh, I think we're run out of time. I do want to mention that the question about how can we help get the word out, I would encourage people to go to the Latinos for a Better Future website. We have information there and ways that you can take action, because at the end of the day, none of these benefits are going to get to our communities until this gets passed in the Senate. And so we have to make sure that our senators, the people who represent us in Congress, hear that this is important to Latino communities, to Latino voters, to our little kids who can't vote. They need to hear from us, and we have hopefully provided a website with good information and ways for you to take action and make your voices heard. So I'd encourage you to do that. You want to give some final thoughts, Mark and Roque?
Well, the same. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Hispanic Fed. Thank you, Roque, for taking your time. And thank you. Please extend our thanks to the Administrator Regan for joining us and for the work that you're doing. It's long, hard hours, but it is going to be worthwhile, and want to make sure our community stays on top of this, stays on top of these benefits. And please join us at greenlatinos.org for more continued information as well. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much for your work here, for bringing us together. We're only just starting on this. Bipartisan infrastructure law is only ramping up. We're only halfway there on the Build Back Better Act. So we need everyone's help to make sure that these investments actually get to the communities that they need to get to, and we need to make sure that as those dollars get out the door, we need people to hold to make sure that they're aware of these opportunities and hold our feet to the fire to make sure that we do what we say we will. So look forward to working with you all in the future, and hopefully we can have some more conversations on the back end of the signing of the Build Back Better.
That's what we hope. Thank you, Roque. Thank you, Mark, Laura, and of course, Michael Regan, who joined us at the beginning of this discussion. And thank you, everybody, for your time. I hope that these discussions have given you additional understanding on the climate action and environmental provisions of President Biden's Build Back Better Act. And we will continue working to make this legislation not only a reality, but that it makes our priority, our community, a top priority. And again, to learn more about how we're doing this and to be part of this effort, log on to latinosforabetterfuture.org. That is www.latinosforabetterfuture.org. Thank you, everybody. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches. Thank you.
Gracias.